Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the freshly painted walls and peering into the shadowy corners of houses that were supposed to be sanctuaries, but instead became sources of unimaginable dread. Imagine, for a moment, the silence of an old house at 3 a.m., a silence so profound it seems to breathe. You hear a floorboard creak upstairs, but you're alone. Or are you? We're diving deep into those true stories where the dream home turns into a living nightmare, a place where the past refuses to stay buried and every shadow seems to watch. You might think your biggest problem is rising damp or a dodgy boiler, but honestly, after tonight, you'll probably agree that noisy plumbing is the least of your worries. You probably won't survive this with your cozy notions of home intact. Let's be real. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all begins, as these things so often do, with a dream. Your dream. A house. Not just any house, mind you, but the house. You spent months, maybe even years, scrolling through listings, enduring open houses with lukewarm coffee and even more lukewarm small talk from realtors who somehow managed to describe a crumbling shack as having rustic charm. You know the type. Then, one rainy Tuesday, there it is, tucked away at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, slightly set back from its neighbors. It stands with a kind of weary dignity. It's a two-story Victorian, perhaps, with a wide, welcoming porch and those charming bay windows that seem to promise cozy reading nooks and sun-drenched mornings. Maybe it's a sprawling farmhouse with acres of land, a place where you can finally breathe away from the oppressive gray of city life. Whatever its particular style, it calls to you. The price is miraculously within reach. A little bit of a stretch, sure, but doable. The realtor, a suspiciously tan man named Barry, who uses a bit too much air freshener in his car, assures you it's a steal. Needs a little TLC character, he says, conveniently glossing over the peeling paint on one side and the distinct sag in the porch roof that looks less like character and more like imminent structural failure. But you're already smitten. You see past the cosmetic flaws. You envision Christmases here, summer barbecues on that slightly sloping lawn, the kids or future kids, or maybe just a very pampered cat growing up within these walls. The paperwork alone is a horror story, enough to make anyone question their life choices, a mountain of jargon and signatures that feels like signing away your firstborn for a 30-year mortgage. But you conquer it, fueled by caffeine and the intoxicating vision of your future. This particular house, your house, has an allure that's hard to define. It's not just the architecture or the slightly overgrown garden that hints at forgotten roses. There's a feeling about it, a sense of history, of lives lived. You tell yourself it's a good feeling, a comforting one. The previous owners, an elderly couple who moved to a retirement village down south, left behind a few bits and pieces, a dusty set of encyclopedias from the 1970s. Remember those? A strangely ornate walking stick in the hall closet, a faint, lingering scent of lavender in the master bedroom. Quaint, you think. Evidence of a long, peaceful life. The first few days are a chaotic symphony of unpacking boxes, arguing over where the sofa should go, and discovering that the previous occupants apparently believed in the one good teacup philosophy. You're too busy, too exhausted, too high on the fumes of fresh paint and new beginnings to notice much else. If there are subtle oddities, they're easily explained away. That faint chill in the upstairs hallway? Poor insulation typical for these old places. You tell your partner, or perhaps just yourself, with a reassuring nod. The way a door seems to click shut on its own, it's just the house settling. You chuckle, getting used to us. Houses do settle, of course. It's a well-documented phenomenon. Timber dries out, foundations shift minutely over decades. especially in homes built before modern, more stable construction methods became widespread. The post-World War II housing boom, for instance, saw millions of families moving into newly constructed homes, often built quickly to meet demand, and they certainly heard their share of creaks and groans as those structures settled into the landscape. You even find a few charmingly old-fashioned touches. Tucked away in the attic, amongst cobwebs thick as cotton candy, you discover a small, velvet-lined box. Inside, there's no treasure, just a few faded photographs of stern-looking Victorians posing stiffly. It's a little glimpse into the home's distant past. You know, some folks back then even practiced death photography, taking formal portraits of recently deceased loved ones as a memento. A bit morbid by today's standard, sure, but a common practice. It's a quirky little historical tidbit that adds to the house's mystique. You place the box back, a silent acknowledgement of those who came before. There's an old wives' tale, a rather charming superstition actually, that when you move into a new home, you should bring in bread and salt first, for prosperity and to ward off any lingering ill will. You didn't, of course. You were too busy wrestling with a flat-pack bookcase that seemed to have more pieces than a space shuttle. Still, the thought crosses your mind fleetingly one evening as you stand in the quiet living room, boxes still half unpacked around you. The silence of the house is different now that the movers have gone, now that the initial flurry of activity has subsided. It's deeper, more attentive. You dismiss it. It's just your imagination, overtired and overstimulated. This is your dream house after all. You painted the kitchen that sunny yellow you always wanted. You hung the curtains your mother spent weeks sewing. This is the start of a wonderful new chapter. The undercurrents, if there are any, are still too faint to register against the bright, hopeful surface of your new life. Historians still argue whether the deep-seated anxieties about new dwellings and folklore reflected genuine supernatural beliefs, or were simply a way for communities to process the inherent stresses and uncertainties of relocation and establishing a new home. Whatever the case, you're blissfully unaware, convinced that any strangeness is just the quirky charm of an old building. You even joke with a friend on the phone, "Yeah, it's got character, all right? Pretty sure it's going to need an exorcism to fix the plumbing. But hey, location, location, location." Little do you know how close to the mark that offhand comment might eventually prove to be. For now, though, it's just a house. Your house. And it's perfect. Or so you believe that you've been in the house for a few weeks now. Most of the boxes are unpacked, though a few stubborn ones linger in the spare room, looking accusingly at you every time you walk past, like tiny cardboard monuments to procrastination. You've established your routines, the morning coffee brewed while you squint at your phone, the evening ritual of deciding what to microwave for dinner after a long day, the weekend attempts at gardening that mostly involve pulling out plants you later realize were supposed to be there. Life is settling into a comfortable rhythm, and that initial new house high is still pleasantly buzzing in your veins. You've even managed to hang a picture straight on the second try, a personal best. It starts subtly. A faint tapping sound, usually late at night when a house is quiet, the hum of the city has died down, and the only other noise is the gentle whir of the refrigerator. You're lying in bed, drifting off, or perhaps engrossed in a book, and you hear it. Tappa, tappa, tap, coming from somewhere downstairs. The first few times, you barely register it. Probably a branch against the window. You murmur, pulling the covers a little higher. Or maybe it's the ancient plumbing. These old houses, with their labyrinthine pipework installed long before anyone worried about things like water hammer arresters, are notorious for their nocturnal orchestras. In fact, during the Victorian era, with the widespread adoption of indoor plumbing in wealthier homes, homeowners often complained about the gurgles and groans emanating from their walls, a new and sometimes alarming soundscape for domestic life. They didn't have YouTube tutorials on how to bleed a radiator back then, did they? Just a lot of crossed fingers and hoping the pipes wouldn't burst. Then there's the creaking. Oh, the creaking. Intellectually, that old houses creak. It's what they do. The wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. The timber has grown under the weight of decades. The floorboards settle. It's the house breathing, living. You tell yourself this repeatedly. But these creaks, they seem almost deliberate. There's a particular spot on the main staircase, about halfway up, that groans with such a mournful, protracted sigh. It sounds like it's lamenting all its life choices. You start to avoid that step, taking the stairs two at a time like you're training for some obscure Olympic event, much to the amusement of your partner, if you have one, or the confusion of your cat, who just stares at you with that classic feline expression of, "Why is the giant hairless ape being weird again?" Sometimes you'll be in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, and you'll hear a soft thud from the living room, as if a book has fallen off a shelf. You go to investigate, heart doing a little tap dance that has nothing to do with the caffeine, but everything is in its place. The remote is still on the arm of the sofa. The magazines are neatly stacked. No errant novels have taken a dive. Must have been the neighbors, you decide, even though the walls are thick, and Mr. Henderson next door seems to spend most of his time engaged in spirited debates with his television at a perfectly reasonable volume. You might even try a little hello. Is the house trying to tell me something? Did I leave the iron on again? You laugh, but it's a slightly nervous laugh. It's probably fine. People have been attributing personalities and even intentions to inanimate objects and homes for centuries. There's a quirky old folk belief in some parts of Europe about a domovoi, a household spirit that, if kept happy with offerings of milk and bread, will protect the home, but if angered, might cause minor mischief, like hiding things or making noises. Maybe your domovoi just has a penchant for dramatic sound effects. Historians still argue whether the pervasive belief in such household spirits was a genuine article of faith or more of a metaphorical way to understand the unpredictable nature of a home environment. The unexplained draft, the sudden chill, the floorboard that always creaks. These were all part of life before central heating and perfectly sealed window frames. You, however, have double glazing and what Barry the realtor called a recently serviced boiler, so your explanations need to be a bit more modern. It's probably just the wind, you'll say, even on a perfectly still night. Or the cat must have knocked something over. When a cat is curled up asleep on your lap, purring like a tiny, furry motor. The sounds are inconsistent, too, which is part of what makes them so easy to dismiss. For a few days, there will be nothing but the comforting, normal sounds of a home. You'll start to relax, thinking, see, it was just my imagination working overtime. Too much cheese before bed, probably. And then, just as you're feeling smugly rational, you'll hear a faint whisper that seems to come from right behind you while you're washing dishes, so indistinct you can't make out any words, like someone sighing from the very edge of hearing. You whip around, suds flying, but there's no one there. Just the empty doorway to the dining room and the slowly dripping tap you really need to get around to fixing. Okay, that was weird. You admit your skin prickling for a moment. Definitely need to lay off the true crime podcast before doing chores. One evening, you're watching television, something light and fluffy, probably involving competitive baking or improbably attractive doctors saving lives. Suddenly, from upstairs, comes a distinct series of footsteps. Not a creak, not a groan, but the clear, rhythmic sound of someone walking across the landing. Thump, 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 thump. Heavy, deliberate. Your blood turns to lukewarm coffee, the bad kind from the open houses. You freeze, remote clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Your partner, if present, looks at you. Did you hear that? You both strain your ears. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. After a moment that stretches into an eternity, you manage a shaky, probably just the pipes again, but you both know it didn't sound like pipes. Pipes gurgle, they hiss, they occasionally bang like a tiny, angry plumber is trapped within them. But they don't usually wear boots and take a leisurely stroll across the upstairs floor. You try to rationalize it. Maybe it was a sound from outside, amplified in a strange way. Maybe a particularly large squirrel has taken up residence in your attic and is practicing its tap dancing routine. Unlikely, but less unsettling than the alternative. You even consider if the house's frame, perhaps built with unseasoned timber common in some older constructions, is warping more dramatically than usual. Sometimes, if wood wasn't properly dried before being used in construction, a common issue in periods of rapid building, like after major fires or during gold rushes, it can continue to shrink, twist, and make some truly alarming noises for decades. You cling to these explanations like a drowning sailor to a piece of driftwood. Because the alternative, the idea that the sounds are not random, not structural, but intentional, well, that's not something you're ready to entertain. Not yet. For now, it's just the house settling. It has to be. The unsettling sounds continue, a subtle, unnerving soundtrack to your new life. But now things start to get a little more personal, a little more hands-on, if you can call it that when you can't see the hands. It begins with your keys. You're absolutely certain you left them on the small table by the front door, the one you bought specifically for keys and mail, and those optimistic leaflets about local pizza places. It's your designated key spot. You always put them there. Yet, when you're rushing to leave for work, late as usual, they're gone. Vanished. You search frantically, patting your pockets for the 10th time, checking under the sofa cushions where loose change and forgotten snacks go to retire. Nothing. After 20 minutes of increasingly panicked searching, which involves blaming everyone else in the house, even if you live alone, you somehow manage to blame an imaginary, incompetent roommate. You find them. They're sitting innocently on the kitchen counter, right next to the fruit bowl that's currently nurturing a colony of suspiciously sentient bananas. Oh, you think. I could have sworn. You chalk it up to stress, to being overtired, to the general chaos of life. Everyone misplaces things. It's a universal human experience, like accidentally liking an old photo while cyberstalking someone. But it happens again. This time it's your favorite mug, the one with the slightly chipped rim that holds the perfect amount of coffee. You washed it, left it on the draining board. The next morning, it's in the living room, perched on top of the television. Then it's the TV remote, which you distinctly remember placing on a coffee table, only to find it later nestled among the shoes by the back door. It's never anything valuable, nothing that would suggest a break-in. Just small, everyday objects, moving with a mischievous, almost playful randomness. It's like living with a very subtle, very particular poltergeist who has an obsession with minor domestic reorganization. You start to doubt your own memory. Am I losing my mind? You wonder half-jokingly as you retrieve your glasses from inside the refrigerator. Maybe I need more sleep. Or less cheese. Definitely one of the two. This phenomenon of disappearing object syndrome, or DOS as it's sometimes humorously called, though not by actual scientists, mind you, is something many people report. Folklorists might point to tales of borrowers or mischievous house fae who delight in confusing humans. There's even a quirky, fringe theory some people entertain called the resonance theory of object placement, which suggests that objects naturally try to move to places of similar vibrational energy, which sound delightfully new age but has absolutely zero basis in physics. Still, it's more comforting than tiny invisible people are messing with my stuff. The creaking stairs, your old frenemy, also seem to be upping their game. Remember that one particularly vocal step. It now seems to groan specifically when you're home alone, often when you're in a different part of the house, making you jump and wonder if someone has just come in. Sometimes you'll hear a sequence of creaks, as if someone is slowly, deliberately climbing the staircase. You'll call out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Your voice will sound pathetically small in the sudden, answering silence. You'll creep to the bottom of the stairs, heart thumping like a drum solo, peering up into the shadowy landing. Nothing. Just the grandfather clock in the hall, if you're fancy enough to own one, or perhaps it was another charming leftover from the previous owners, ticking somberly. Each tick marking another second you're spending wondering if you've accidentally bought a haunted house starter pack. One afternoon, you're working from home, engrossed in a spreadsheet that seems specifically designed to suck the will to live from your very soul. You hear a soft scratching sound coming from the attic. Great, you think squirrels. Or worse, rats. Barry the realtor definitely didn't mention a complimentary rodent infestation. The scratching stops, then starts again, a little more insistent this time. This is a common problem in older homes, especially those with easy access points like loose roof tiles or unscreened vents. In fact, during the Great London Plague of 1665, homeowners were legally required to deal with vermin, as rats were correctly, as it turned out, suspected of spreading the disease. They didn't have humane traps back then. It was more of a cat and a prayer situation. You sigh, making a mental note to buy some traps, or perhaps a very brave cat. But then the scratching is accompanied by a faint, dragging sound, as if something moderately heavy is being pulled across the attic floorboards. Your blood runs a little cold. Squirrels are energetic, yes, but they're not generally known for their furniture rearranging skills. You try to ignore it, crank up your music, but the sound persists, a nagging worry at the edge of your hearing. Historians still argue whether the intense fear of attics and basements prevalent in popular culture stems from primal fears of dark, enclosed spaces, or if it's a more modern construct fueled by horror movies. Either way, your attic is rapidly losing its charming storage space appeal and heading straight into nope, never going up there again territory. The house seems to be playing tricks on your senses. You'll catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of your eye, a fleeting shadow in a doorway, but when you turn to look, there's nothing there. You'll smell a faint, unidentifiable perfume in a room where no perfume has been sprayed, or a whiff of old pipe tobacco, even though no one in the house smokes. These phantom smells, or phantasmia, can actually have medical explanations, but in your current state of heightened awareness, every unexplained sensory input feels like another piece of a disturbing puzzle. You start leaving lights on, even when you're in the room. You double-check that doors are locked, even though you know you just locked them. You talk to yourself more, narrating your actions as if to reassure yourself that you're still in control, that you're the one dictating what happens in this house, not the other way around. Just putting the kettle on, you'll announce to the empty kitchen, "Time to take out the bins," you'll declare cheerfully to the silent hallway. It's a coping mechanism, a way to fill the increasingly unsettling silences. You even try humming, jaunty off-key tune to ward off the creeping unease. It doesn't really work, but it makes you feel slightly less like a character in a horror film, even if the evidence is slowly, insidiously mounting to the contrary. Your dream house is starting to feel less like a dream and more like a low-budget psychological thriller where you're the increasingly bewildered star. And the keys? They turn up inside one of your shoes the next day. Of course they do. Where else would they be? If you have children, or even if you just have very imaginative pets, this is often when things take a particularly chilling turn. Let's assume, for the sake of this unfolding unease, that you do have children. Perhaps a curious 6-year-old daughter named Lily, who has a penchant for talking to her stuffed animals, and a quieter, more observant 8-year-old son, Tom, who is currently obsessed with building elaborate Lego castles that invariably get knocked over. They were so excited about the new house, about having their own rooms, about the big garden they were promised would be perfect for adventures. And for a while it is. They explore every nook and cranny, their laughter echoing through the rooms, a sound that initially feels like it's cleansing the house of its aged stillness. But then Lily starts talking about her new friend. Emily says hello. She'll announce casually at the dinner table, midway through a mouthful of spaghetti. You smile, playing along. Oh, does she? And who's Emily? You ask, expecting her to point to her well-loved, slightly grubby teddy bear. But Lily shakes her head, her pigtails bouncing. No, silly. Emily lives in my closet. She's shy. An imaginary friend. Perfectly normal for her age. In fact, child psychologists generally view imaginary companions as a healthy sign of a developing imagination and a way for children to process emotions in social situations. It's a common developmental phase. During the Victorian era, a period known for its rather strict and formal child-rearing practices, children often retreated into rich fantasy worlds, and imaginary friends were likely just as prevalent, though perhaps less openly discussed with adults. You don't think much of it at first. Kids are weird. It's a well-established fact, right up there with water is wet, and you'll always choose the slowest queue at the supermarket. But Emily's presence becomes more persistent. Lily will be in her room, seemingly having detailed conversations with the empty air. You'll hear her giggling, then her voice will drop to a conspiratorial whisper. Emily says you shouldn't open that box in the attic. She'll tell you one day, her eyes wide and serious as you're contemplating finally tackling that last bastion of unpacked belongings. A little shiver runs down your spine, but you brush it off. That's nice, sweetie, but Mommy needs to find the Christmas decorations eventually. Tom, your usually sensible son, also starts acting a little strangely. He becomes more withdrawn, spending more time alone in his room. When you ask him what's wrong, he just shrugs. But one evening, you overhear him talking to Lily in hushed tones. Emily isn't the only one, he says. There's a boy, too. He hides under the stairs. He cries sometimes. Now, this is a little more concerning. Two imaginary friends? One crying under the stairs? It's starting to sound less like innocent childhood fantasy and more like the synopsis for a low-budget horror film you definitely skip on a streaming service. You try to talk to them about it gently. Are these friends nice to you? You ask. Lily nods enthusiastically. Emily shares her secrets. She told me where the old lady hid her special necklace before she went to sleep for a very long time. This is delivered with the innocent, matter-of-fact tone only a child can manage when relaying something profoundly creepy. Your internal alarm bells are now clanging like a 5-alarm fire. What old lady? What necklace? You remember the faded photographs in the attic, the stern Victorian faces. Could there be a connection? Or is it just Lily's overactive imagination, fueled by the atmosphere of the old house? The games they play also take on an unsettling edge. They'll play hide and seek, but Lily will insist that Emily is it and will count to 20 with her eyes squeezed shut, facing a blank wall. Sometimes you'll find them sitting in a circle in the living room with an empty space in their midst, as if for an unseen participant. We're having a tea party, Tom will explain, looking at you with an expression you can't quite decipher. Emily likes her tea with no sugar, and the boy, he just likes to watch. The casual acceptance of these spectral playmates is perhaps the most unnerving part. They don't seem scared. Not yet, anyway. You even find strange little drawings. Lily, who usually draws rainbow-colored unicorns and lopsided smiling suns, starts producing pictures of pale, shadowy figures with large, dark eyes, often standing in the windows of a crudely drawn house that looks suspiciously like your own. When you ask her about them, she says, "That's Emily. And that's her brother." They're sad because they can't find their mommy. There's a quirky old belief found in various cultures that children are more sensitive to the spirit world, their minds not yet cluttered with the skepticism of adulthood. Historians still argue whether historical accounts of children claiming to see ghosts or spirits were genuine perceptions, misinterpretations of natural phenomena, or simply reflections of the prevailing folklore and anxieties of their time. One particular incident sticks with you. You're in the kitchen trying to decipher a recipe that seems to require ingredients you've never heard of. What even is asafoetida? And why would you put it in a cake? Lily runs in, breathless. Mommy, Mommy, come quick. Emily wants to show you something. She tugs your hand, pulling you towards her bedroom. You follow, half amused, half uneasy. She leads you to her closet, the door slightly ajar. She's in there, Lily whispers, pointing. She says she has a present for you. You peer into the dim closet, half expecting to see a misplaced toy or a forgotten sock. Instead, sitting on the floor, right in the middle of the closet, is a small, tarnished silver locket. It's old, Victorian in style, intricately carved with forget-me-nots. You've never seen it before in your life. Where did this come from, sweetie? You ask, your voice barely a whisper. Lily beams. Emily gave it to me. For you. She said it belonged to her grandmother. You pick up the locket. It's cold to the touch, unnaturally so. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. This isn't an imaginary friend scenario anymore. This is something else. Something that can apparently interact with the physical world, leaving tangible, albeit antique gifts. The line between a child's vivid imagination and something far more inexplicable has just become terrifyingly blurred. You try to smile reassuringly at Lily, but the smile feels brittle, like a porcelain doll's. That's a very thoughtful of Emily. You manage, stuffing the cold locket into your pocket, try not to think about where it came from, or who Emily really is. The subtle shifts in temperature are the next thing to truly get under your skin, quite literally. You'll be sitting in the living room, a room that is usually quite warm, perhaps even a little stuffy thanks to the afternoon sun and your ongoing battle with a thermostat, which seems to have a mind of its own. Or maybe it's just another quirky feature Barry the realtor forgot to mention. Suddenly, a patch of air around you will turn noticeably, icily cold. It's not a draft for an open window. You've checked repeatedly, becoming almost obsessive about window latches and door seals. This is a contained, localized cold, like walking through an invisible freezer aisle in your own home. The hairs on your arms will stand on end, a prickling sensation that has nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the room, everything to do with a primal instinct screaming that something is very wrong. These cold spots become more frequent, more pronounced. There's one particular corner in the dining room, near an old and used fireplace, that is perpetually chilly, no matter how high you crank the heating. If you have a pet, you'll notice they actively avoid that area. Your dog, who normally follows you around like a furry shadow, will whine and refuse to enter the dining room. Your cat, a creature usually driven by an insatiable curiosity and a belief that all surfaces are merely suggestions for napping spots, will arch its back and hiss at that corner before bolting from the room. Animals, as the saying goes, are often more attuned to things humans miss. It's a widely held belief, though scientifically unproven, that animals can sense energies or presences beyond our perception. Consider the historical accounts of horses refusing to pass certain haunted crossroads, or dogs barking uncontrollably at empty spaces. Maybe they were just reacting to subtle environmental cues, or maybe, just maybe, they saw something you couldn't. Then comes the feeling of being watched. It's an insidious sensation, one that starts as a faint tickle at the back of your neck and gradually grows into an oppressive certainty. You'll be doing something mundane, washing dishes, folding laundry, trying to figure out why your internet connection has inexplicably dropped for the third time that day, and you'll just know that someone is looking at you. You turn around quickly, heart leaping into your throat, but of course, there's no one there. Just the empty hallway, the silent rooms, the familiar furniture that is now starting to feel less like comforting set dressing and more like silent, judging witnesses. This feeling is strongest in certain parts of the house. The upstairs landing, for instance. You'll be walking towards your bedroom, and the air will grow heavy, a silence suddenly charged. and you'll feel eyes boring into your back. You quicken your pace, fumbling for the light switch, desperate to banish the shadows and the unseen gaze. Or perhaps it's the basement, if your house has one, that subterranean realm of damp concrete, cobwebs, and the looming presence of the ancient boiler that rumbles like a discontented dragon. You avoid going down there as much as possible, sending your partner, if you have one, a brave quest for stored paint cans or the Christmas lights you're sure you put down there last January. One evening, you're home alone. The children, if you have them, are asleep, or perhaps you're in that blissful, child-free stage of life where your main responsibility is keeping your houseplants alive, a task proving more challenging than anticipated. You're in the kitchen, making a late-night snack, probably something you'll regret in the morning, like that questionable leftover curry or an entire sleeve of cookies. You're humming to yourself, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, when the hairs on your arms suddenly stand on end. The air around you plummets in temperature, so sharply that you can see your breath fogging in front of you for a brief, startling moment. And then you feel it. A distinct, palpable presence right behind you. So close, you could almost feel a breath on your neck. You freeze, sandwich halfway to your mouth, every muscle in your body tensed. You don't dare turn around. You can't. The silence in the kitchen is absolute, save for the frantic thumping of your own heart, which sounds loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. Seconds stretch into an eternity. You are utterly, terrifyingly convinced that if you turn, you will see something. Something you don't want to see. Something that shouldn't be there. The pressure of that unseen gaze is immense, a physical weight pressing down on you. Finally, with a monumental effort of will, you spin around, maybe letting out a small, involuntary yelp that sounds suspiciously like a startled chihuahua. Nothing. The kitchen is empty. The back door is locked. The windows are secure. The only thing out of place is the puddle of spilled orange juice on the floor from when you jumped. You stand there, panting, adrenaline coursing through your veins, feeling both foolish and profoundly terrified. Was it your imagination? Waking dream? Or did someone stand right behind you, watching you with cold, invisible eyes? Historians still argue whether the common human experience of feeling watched in empty spaces is a leftover evolutionary trait, our ancestors needing to be hyper-aware of predators, or if it's purely psychological, a product of anxiety and suggestion. Regardless of the academic debate, for you, in that moment, the experience is undeniably real. You quickly abandon your snack, flick off the kitchen light with a trembling hand, and retreat to the relative safety of your bedroom, making sure to lock the door behind you, a gesture that suddenly feels less like a habit and more like a desperate, but probably futile, act of self-preservation. Sleep is a long time coming that night as you lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in the kitchen, the icy chill, the crushing certainty of an unseen watcher. The walls of your dream house seem to be closing in, the shadows in the corners of your eyes growing deeper, more malevolent. The playful nudges of misplaced keys have escalated, and the game is no longer fun. You even start to notice subtle changes in reflections. A fleeting glimpse of movement in a darkened window pane as you walk past. A shadow in the bathroom mirror that vanishes when you look directly at it. It's like the house is trying to show you something, but only in brief, unnerving flashes, ensuring you can never be quite sure if you saw it or just imagined it. This constant uncertainty is exhausting. It's like that quirky tidbit about how mirrors in the Victorian era were sometimes covered at night, especially in a room where someone had died, out of a superstition that the soul of the deceased could become trapped in the glass. You're not normally superstitious, but lately you've been giving your hallway mirrors some very suspicious side glances. The unease in your home has now become a constant, unwelcome companion, like that one relative who overstays their welcome after Thanksgiving and critiques your life choices. You can't shake the feeling that this isn't just an old house settling, or an overactive imagination. The cold spots are too cold, the feeling of being watched too intense, the children's imaginary friends too specific and unsettlingly knowledgeable about things they couldn't possibly know. The silver locket, remember that? You've hidden it away in a drawer, but its cold presence seems to emanate even through the wood, a silent, chilling reminder. You decide it's time to do some digging. Maybe learning about the history of the house, the people who lived and died within its walls, will provide some rational explanations, or at the very least, confirm your growing, terrifying suspicions. Your first stop is usually the local library or historical society. These places are treasure troves of information, staffed by dedicated, often delightfully eccentric individuals who know the town's history like the back of their hand, including all the juicy bits that don't make it into the official tourist brochures. You feel a bit like a detective in a cozy mystery novel, minus the tweed jacket and the uncanny ability to solve murders armed only with a cup of Earl Grey and keen observation skills. You explain somewhat sheepishly that you've just moved into the old house on Elm Street, or whatever your fictional street name is, and you're curious about its past. The librarian, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Gable, with spectacles perched precariously on her nose, gives you a knowing look. "Ah, the Holloway place," she says, her voice dropping slightly. "That one's got a bit of a history, dear. This is librarian code for buckle up, buttercup, you're in for a ride." She directs you to the archives, dusty old maps, bound volumes of local newspapers brittle with age, census records, and perhaps even a few handwritten journals or letters if you're lucky. It's like stepping back in time. You learn that your house is one of the oldest in the area, built in the late 19th century by a wealthy merchant family, the Holloways, who made their fortune in, well, something suitably Victorian, like exporting button hooks or manufacturing high-quality fainting couches. The architectural plans, if they exist, might show original room layouts, perhaps revealing walled-off spaces or altered configurations that could explain some of the strange acoustics or cold spots. As you delve deeper, sifting through faded newsprint and spidery handwriting, a picture of the Holloway family begins to emerge. There was Mr. Josiah Holloway, a stern-looking patriarch with impressive mutton-chop whiskers. His wife, Elspeth, who, according to one brief social notice, was of a delicate constitution, and their children, a son, Arthur, who went off to war and never returned, and two daughters, Clara and Emily. Your blood turns to ice water. Emily. The name Lily, your daughter, had given her imaginary friend. Coincidence? Your rational mind tries to scream yes, but the small, terrified part of you, the part that felt the icy breath in the kitchen, isn't so sure. You find a tragic article from an old newspaper, dated decades ago. It describes a devastating fire that swept through a portion of the Holloway house. Several lives were rumored to have been lost, though the details are frustratingly vague, common in older reporting where sensationalism sometimes trumped factual accuracy. Fires were a terrifyingly common disaster in the days of open flames for heating and lighting in wooden frame houses. The Great Fire of London in 1666, for example, destroyed over 13,000 houses, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of cities built largely of timber. Your own house, while not ancient by London standards, certainly predates modern fire safety codes. You also start to hear whispers from the community. You casually mention your address to the chatty cashier at the local grocery store, or to your new neighbor, Mr. Henderson, while retrieving your runaway recycling bin on a windy Tuesday. Their reactions are telling. A slight hesitation, a flicker of something in their eyes. "Oh, that house," they'll say, a subtle emphasis on the that. If you press them gently, they might share some of the local lore. Stories that have been passed down through generations, embellished over time, but perhaps, just perhaps, containing a kernel of truth. They say Old Man Holloway was a cruel sort, the cashier might tell you, leaning conspiratorially over the counter amidst the beep of scanned groceries. Worked his servants to the bone. And his wife, well, she wasn't happy, poor thing. Mr. Henderson, a man who seems to have a story for every occasion, Might recall his grandmother telling him tales about strange lights seen in the windows of the Holloway place when it stood empty for a stretch of years. And the children, he'd say, lowering his voice. Folks always said something sad happened to the Holloway children. Never quite right that house after them. These are just stories, of course. Local legends. Every old town has them. Every old house with a bit of character accumulates a few ghostly tales, like dust bunnies under the bed. It's part of their charm, right? Except these stories are now uncomfortably close to your own experiences. The name Emily. The whispers of tragedy involving children. The pervasive sense of sadness that seems to cling to the very fabric of the house. Historians still argue whether local legends about haunted houses serve a social function, perhaps as cautionary tales, or as a way for a community to collectively remember and process past traumas that might otherwise be forgotten. You find a particularly quirky tidbit in a local history pamphlet about Victorian mourning customs. It mentions that sometimes, if a child died, their favorite toys or even a lock of their hair will be buried with them, or sometimes kept in a special mourning box. The image of the small, tarnished locket, found in Lily's closet, flashes in your mind. Could it have been a mourning locket? Something belonging to the original Emily Holloway, or her mother, Elspeth? The thought is deeply unsettling. The research, instead of providing comfort and rational explanations, has only deepened the mystery and your growing sense of dread. The house is no longer just bricks and mortar. It's a repository of secrets, of sorrow, of lives interrupted. And it seems those lives, or echoes of them, are not entirely at rest. You return home that evening, the weight of your findings heavy in your thoughts. As you walk up the path, the house seems to watch you, its windows like dark, knowing eyes. The welcoming facade it presented on that first rainy Tuesday now feels like a carefully constructed mask, hiding a much darker, more complex reality. The whispers of the past are growing louder, and you're beginning to fear they're trying to tell you something you're not sure you want to hear, armed, or perhaps burdened, with the fragmented history gleaned from local archives and whispered community tales. You now look at your home with new, uneasy eyes. The name Millie, the stories of a tragic fire, the lingering sadness Mr. Henderson mentioned, these are no longer abstract historical footnotes. They feel like active ingredients in the unsettling atmosphere of your house. You become determined to find something more concrete, a specific event, a definitive tragedy that could explain the oppressive feeling, the cold spots, the children's spectral playmates. You feel a morbid compulsion to understand the source of the house's sorrow, as if by naming it, you might somehow lessen its power. Your investigation narrows. The fire mentioned in the old newspaper clippings seems like a critical event. You try to find more detailed accounts. Perhaps the local fire department, if it has records going back that far, might have a report. Or maybe court documents, old insurance claims, or even personal diaries from that period, if any survived and were archived. This kind of deep dive research is painstaking. It's not like a quick Google search where answers of varying reliability, admittedly, are just a click away. This is sifting through delicate, often poorly indexed documents, squinting at faded ink, and dealing with the wonderfully arcane cataloging systems of yesteryear. It's a bit like historical detective work, piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half are written in a language you barely understand. Let's say you stumble upon a more detailed, albeit sensationalized newspaper account from a regional paper, one that wasn't afraid to print the grislier details. The headline itself might be enough to send a shiver down your spine. Elm Street Inferno claims young lives. Holloway family devastated by midnight blaze. The article, yellowed and fragile, recounts a horrific night. It speaks of a fire starting in the nursery wing of the house, a wing that no longer exists, you realize, probably demolished and rebuilt after the catastrophe. It mentions the heroic but ultimately futile efforts of neighbors and the fledgling volunteer fire brigade, who in those days often had little more than buckets and bravery to combat a raging inferno. Mainstream historical fact: organized municipal fire departments with steam-powered engines were becoming more common in larger cities in the late 19th century, but smaller towns often relied on less equipped volunteer outfits for a long time. The article names the victims, not just several lives, as the previous, more circumspect local paper had hinted. It names 2 children, Emily Holloway, age 6, and her younger brother Thomas, aged 4. They perished in the flames, trapped in their upstairs nursery. Their mother, Elspeth Holloway, driven to distraction by grief and, according to the article's rather judgmental tone, a pre-existing nervous disposition, succumbed to illness or perhaps a broken heart, the article implies, a few months later. Josiah Holloway, the stern patriarch, lived on a broken man, eventually selling the rebuilt house and moving away, the family name slowly fading from local prominence. Suddenly, everything clicks into a horrifying, tragic focus. Emily, the 6-year-old girl, the same name and age as Lily's imaginary friend. Thomas, the younger brother. Tom, your son, spoke of a crying boy hiding under the stairs. The sadness of the house, the cold spot near the old nursery location, which you now mentally map out, the locket, it all coalesces into a profoundly sorrowful narrative. The children's innocent games take on a far more poignant, even heartbreaking dimension. Are they playing with the spectral remnants of children who died too soon, forever trapped in the place of their demise? You might even find an old photograph, perhaps misfiled in a box of unrelated documents at the Historical Society, or tucked into the back of a dusty town ledger. A faded sepia-toned image of 2 small children, a girl with solemn eyes and neatly parted hair, holding the hand of a smaller boy with a mischievous glint in his eye. On the back, in faded copperplate script, it simply says, Emily and Thomas Holloway, 1888. The resemblance to the shadowy figures Lily draws, the description she gives of Emily, is uncanny, chilling. This discovery changes everything. The haunting is no longer just a series of unsettling, disconnected events. It has a source, a heart, a profound and terrible grief woven into the very fabric of the house. You think of Lily talking to Emily in her closet, Tom hearing a boy crying. Are they truly communicating with these lost children? Or are they somehow picking up on psychic residue, an echo of the intense emotions imprinted on the location? Historians still argue whether locations can retain an imprint of past traumatic events, a concept popular in paranormal circles but lacking scientific validation, or if such experiences are purely psychological projections influenced by the knowledge of a place's tragic history. You find a quirky, fringe tidbit related to this idea. Some paranormal investigators believe that intense emotional events, especially those involving sudden death or prolonged suffering, can create a kind of psychic recording in the environment, replaying certain sights, sounds, or feelings under specific conditions. It's like the house itself has a memory, and sometimes that memory bleeds through into the present. You now feel like you're living inside one of those memories. The knowledge of the children's fate is a heavy weight. The house, once your dream, now feels like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards, every cold draft, every unexplained whisper seems to be an echo of their short, tragic lives. You look at your own children, laughing and playing, blissfully unaware of the true nature of their unseen companions, and a profound sadness washes over you, mixed with a growing fear. What do these spectral children want? Are they simply lonely, seeking playmates? Or is there something more to their presence? Something tied to the unresolved trauma of their deaths? The joy of your new home has been completely eclipsed by this discovery. The freshly painted walls now seem to mock you with their cheerful colors, a thin veneer over a deep, abiding sorrow. The slightly overgrown garden, once a symbol of future adventures, now feels like a place where innocent laughter was cruelly silenced. You feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility, of being privy to a secret the house has held for over a century. But what are you supposed to do with this knowledge? How do you live in a house saturated with such profound tragedy, a house where the echoes of lost children still play in the shadows? The answers are elusive, and the path forward is shrouded in an increasingly ominous mist. Knowing the tragic story of Emily and Thomas, knowing their names, changes the atmosphere from merely unsettling to profoundly sad and deeply unnerving. You now feel an almost desperate need for confirmation, something more tangible than a feeling, cold spot, or an old, brittle newspaper clipping. Part of you wants proof for your own sanity, and part of you perhaps feels that if you are to take any further steps, you need more than just a story. So, inspired maybe by the countless paranormal investigation shows you've half-watched late at night, you decide to try and capture some evidence. You feel a little foolish, slightly theatrical, but you have to try. You start simply using the voice recorder app on your smartphone. You go into Lily's room one afternoon when she's outside playing. Feeling like a spy in your own home, you place the phone on her dresser near the closet where the locket appeared and press record. You leave it there for an hour. You do the same in the chilly corner of the dining room and on the upstairs landing where you so often feel watched. Later that evening, with a knot of anxiety tightening in your stomach, you retrieve the phone and sit down with a pair of headphones ready to listen. Mostly, it's exactly what you'd expect. Hours of silence, the low-frequency hum of the house, the sound of the refrigerator kicking on, a car driving past outside, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. You listen intently, straining your ears, scrolling through stretches of monotonous background noise. You even capture yourself sighing heavily down in the kitchen, a clear recording of you complaining to yourself that you're out of coffee. Excellent, solid proof of caffeine dependency, but not exactly paranormal. You're just about ready to dismiss the entire effort as a silly, time-wasting exercise. Then, listening to the recording from Lily's room, you hear it. Amidst the faint ambient room tone, after about 20 minutes of near silence, there is a tiny whispered sound buried deep in the digital noise. It's incredibly faint and lasts barely a second. You rewind, turn the volume up, straining to hear. It's high-pitched. It could be anything, a mouse, a settling noise, interference. But the more you listen to it, the more it sounds like a single side word. Cold. Your skin prickles. You play it again and again. Could you be imagining it? Absolutely. The human brain is wired to find patterns, especially voices or faces, in random stimuli, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. It's why people see a man in the moon or a face in a slice of toast. But this felt different. This phenomenon, capturing voices on electronic media that weren't heard at the time of recording, is of course known as EVP, or electronic voice phenomena. It became a popular area of interest for paranormal researchers in the mid-20th century, pioneered and popularized by figures like the Swedish filmmaker Fredrik Jurgensen and a Latvian psychologist, Konstantin Raudive. Raudive, using radio equipment in the 60s and 70s, claimed to have recorded tens of thousands of such voices, which he believed belonged to the deceased, sparking a quirky, ongoing fascination with these so-called Raudive voices. Intrigued and terrified, you decide to get slightly more technical. You buy an inexpensive digital voice recorder, hoping a dedicated device might yield clearer results. This time you decide to ask questions, feeling more ridiculous than ever, speaking aloud to the empty, chilly rooms. "Is there anybody here with me?" You ask the dining room corner. "What is your name? Can you tell me what you want?" You feel like you're auditioning for a low-budget ghost hunting show, and half expect the producer to pop out and tell you to show more dramatic fear for the camera. You leave the recorder running overnight on the upstairs landing. The next morning, retrieving it with a sense of trepidation, you repeat the tedious, nerve-wracking process of listening back. Hours of the house's usual nighttime groans and clicks. The rumble of the boiler, distant wail of a siren. And then, following the exact point where you ask, "Is there anybody here?" there is a distinct sound. It's not a voice, not this time, but a faint yet clear sound of a child sobbing. Just two heartbreaking, electronically captured sobs, followed by static. Chills crawl up your spine, and don't leave. This wasn't a vague whisper. It sounded unmistakably like a child crying, a desolate, hopeless sound. You think of Thomas, the little boy in the newspaper story, crying boy your son said was hiding under the stairs. You keep listening. On the same recording, much, much later, buried deep in the hiss, you catch a faint, thread-like whispering voice. A girl's voice. It's distorted, broken up by static, but you could swear it says, "scared." Of course, skeptics, scientists, and audio engineers frequently debate EVP, with many arguing that captured sounds are best explained by audio pareidolia, or by random, misinterpreted noises, or by picking up stray radio signals or even snippets of mobile phone conversations. Your old house, with its ancient wiring, could easily be acting like a crude antenna. That's the rational explanation, anyway. Historically, even Thomas Edison, who invented the phonograph in 1877 and gave humanity a way to capture sound, was quoted in Scientific American in the 1920s as reportedly working on a device, a spirit phone, to communicate with the dead, believing it should be possible using sufficiently sensitive instruments. If Edison thought it was worth exploring, maybe you're not entirely crazy. Though a slightly more modern take is probably needed, maybe something that doesn't sound like it's being recorded on wax and replayed through a giant trumpet. The rational explanations, however, do little to calm your nerves as you sit there, headphones clamped to your ears, listening to what sounds like a ghostly, heartbroken child. This isn't fun anymore. This isn't the house having character. You now possess your own deeply personal recordings of anomalous sounds, static-laced cries and whispers that seem to directly corroborate the awful history you uncovered. You save the files, backing them up, though you're not sure why, or who you'd ever play them for. Who would believe you? Sharing these captures feels like sharing a piece of the house's trauma, a trauma that now feels inextricably linked with your own. The static feels like a veil, and for a few horrifying moments, you feel you've heard something through it. Something that is definitely not happy. The house's unsettling presence isn't content to just disturb your waking hours with moving objects, cold spots, and disembodied whispers captured on your decidedly non-professional ghost hunting equipment. Oh no, that would be far too considerate. It begins to invade your sleep, that precious sanctuary where you're supposed to recharge, to escape the stresses of the day. But now your nights become a new landscape of fear, transforming your comfortable bed into a stage for some truly unpleasant subconscious theater. IT starts with nightmares. Vivid, terrifying nightmares, often centered around the house itself. You dream of wandering through endless, distorted corridors that twist and turn in impossible ways, the air thick with smoke, the distant sound of children crying always just out of earshot. You dream of being trapped in dark, confined spaces, feeling an overwhelming sense of panic and an unseen presence pressing in on you. Sometimes Emily and Thomas appear in these dreams, not as the innocent, sad children you've pieced together from history, but as something more accusatory, their eyes hollow, their small hands reaching out. You wake up from these dreams with your heart pounding, tangled in your sheets, the scream caught in your throat, the lingering images seared into your mind. Your partner, if you have one, is probably getting very tired of being jolted awake by your nocturnal thrashings and whimpers. Just a bad dream. You'll gasp, but the fear feels far too real, clinging to you like a shroud. Then you experience something even more disturbing, sleep paralysis. You wake up in the dead of night, your mind fully conscious, but your body completely immobilized. You can see your room, the familiar shapes of furniture cloaked in shadows, but you can't move a muscle, can't speak, can't even turn your head. It's a terrifying sensation, like being buried alive in your own bed. And often, during these episodes, you're not alone. You'll sense a presence in the room with you, a dark figure standing in the corner, or even pressing down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. The feeling of being watched, which plagued your waking hours, is now amplified, up close and personal, in the suffocating grip of paralysis. Sleep paralysis is a recognized medical phenomenon, technically called a parasomnia, occurring when your brain and body aren't quite in sync during the transitions between sleep and wakefulness. Your mind wakes up, but your body is still in REM sleep, where muscles are temporarily paralyzed to prevent you from acting out your dreams, which is generally a good thing. Unless you dream you're a superhero, in which case it's a bit of a letdown. Historians and folklorists have documented experiences akin to sleep paralysis for centuries, often attributing them to supernatural entities like demons, hags, or incubi and succubi who are said to sit on a sleeper's chest. The old hag syndrome is a well-known folk term for sleep paralysis across many cultures, a testament to how universally terrifying this experience can be. Remember Henry Fuseli's famous 1781 painting, The Nightmare, depicting a woman sprawled on her bed with a demonic creature squatting on her chest? That's basically the poster art for sleep paralysis. Knowing the medical explanation, however, does little to diminish the sheer terror of the experience when it's happening to you. When you're lying there, helpless, convinced that the shadowy figure by your bed is not a figment of your sleep-addled brain, but one of the house's resident specters, the academic understanding offers cold comfort. The press of weight on your chest feels undeniably real. The shadowy form you see looming in the periphery of your vision, just beyond your ability to focus, feels malevolent. You try to scream to fight, but your body betrays you, locked in an invisible vice. These episodes leave you exhausted, terrified, and dreading the approach of night. The children, if you have them, also start experiencing sleep disturbances. Lily begins to have night terrors. She'll sit bolt upright in bed, screaming, her eyes wide with unseeing terror, completely inconsolable. She won't remember these episodes in the morning, but they leave you shaken and sleep-deprived. Tom becomes afraid of the dark, something he hasn't been since he was much younger. He insists on sleeping with the hallway light on, and sometimes, in the middle of the night, you'll find him curled up on the floor at the foot of your bed, having crept in for comfort, his face pale and anxious. He'll mumble about bad dreams and noises in the walls, but he's reluctant to elaborate, as if afraid to give voice to his fears. You try everything to reclaim your sleep. Warm milk before bed. Does that ever actually work for anyone? Lavender pillow spray. Reading boring books until your eyelids feel like lead weights. You even consider, somewhat ironically, listening to a sleepy ASMR history podcast, hoping a soothing voice narrating something completely unrelated might lull you into oblivion. Nothing seems to work. The house has its hooks in your subconscious, and it's not letting go. You find yourself becoming chronically tired, irritable, your days a bleary-eyed struggle through a fog of exhaustion. Functioning at work becomes a Herculean task. Your patience wears thin. You snap at your partner, at your kids, over trivial things. The lack of restful sleep erodes your well-being, making you more vulnerable to the psychological toll the house is taking. There's a quirky, though rather unsettling fringe idea that some spiritualists and paranormal believers hold, that spirits can more easily influence or communicate with people when they are in altered states of consciousness, such as dreaming or the hypnagogic state, that period between wakefulness and sleep. They suggest that the veil between worlds is thinner then. Whether you believe that or not, it certainly feels like something is taking advantage of your nightly vulnerability. The waking nightmares, the crushing paralysis, the children's distress, it all adds to the mounting evidence that this house is not just quirky or old, but actively hostile to your peace of mind, even in the supposed safety of your own dreams. Sleep, which should be a refuge, has become another battleground. And it's a battle you feel you are consistently, exhaustingly losing. The shadows in your bedroom seem to deepen each night, and the silence is no longer peaceful, but pregnant with unspoken, unseen threats. You start to dread going to bed, associating your once cozy bedroom with a fresh wave of terror. That's not exactly conducive to sweet dreams, is it? The escalating phenomena, the moving objects, the disembodied voices, the chilling presence, the terrifying nights, and especially the distress of your children have pushed you to a breaking point. You can no longer dismiss this as the house settling or an overactive imagination. This is real, it's happening, and it's affecting your family's well-being. You decide you need to talk to someone to get help, or at the very least, to have your experiences validated by someone outside the increasingly claustrophobic walls of your own home. This, you quickly discover, is much easier said than done. Your first instinct might be to confide in close friends or family. You pick up the phone or meet a friend for coffee, desperate to unburden yourself. You start tentatively. We've been having some strange things happen at the new house. You try to sound casual, as if you're about to recount a mildly amusing anecdote about faulty plumbing. But as you begin to describe the cold spots, the dislodged keys, Lily's conversations with Emily, and the terrifying sleep paralysis, you see the look on their face. It's a mixture of polite concern, barely concealed skepticism, and perhaps a flicker of pity. They'll nod, they'll make sympathetic noises, but their eyes betray their thoughts. Poor thing, the stress of the move must be getting to them. Or worse, maybe they need to lay off the late-night horror movies. They'll offer rational explanations, of course, the same ones you've been desperately clinging to yourself for weeks. Old houses are always drafty. Kids have such vivid imaginations, don't they? Are you sure you're getting enough sleep? They mean well, they do. But their well-intentioned dismissals feel like tiny paper cuts, each one invalidating your fear, your reality. It's incredibly isolating. You came seeking an ally, a witness, and instead, you feel like you're being gently patted on the head and told to run along. It's a bit like complaining about a dragon in your garden and being advised to try a different brand of weed killer. Helpful, but entirely missing the fiery, scaly point. Frustrated and feeling increasingly alone, you might consider reaching out to more official channels. What about the police? You hesitate. What would you even tell them? Officer, I'd like to report a suspected haunting. My keys keep moving, and I think a 6-year-old ghost named Emily left a locket in my daughter's closet. You can already imagine the bemused silence on the other end of the line, followed by a very polite suggestion that perhaps you should contact a different kind of service. Law enforcement agencies are understandably equipped to deal with tangible threats, burglars, vandals, noisy neighbors, not spectral ones. While there have been historical instances where law enforcement did get involved in haunted house cases, it was usually when claims of witchcraft or public nuisance arose, particularly in earlier centuries. For example, the famous Enfield poltergeist case in England in the late 1970s did involve police witnesses who reported seeing objects move inexplicably, a rare instance of official corroboration, though still hotly debated. What about mental health professionals? The thought crosses your mind, laden with a fresh wave of anxiety. Are you going crazy? Is this all some elaborate stress-induced hallucination? Seeking therapy is a valid and healthy response to overwhelming stress and anxiety, and certainly, living in what you perceive to be a haunted house is incredibly stressful. A therapist can help you develop coping mechanisms, manage your fear. But what if they, too, dismiss the core of your experience? What if they pathologize what feels so undeniably real and external to you? The fear of being labeled, of not being believed, can be a powerful deterrent. You might even try talking to your realtor, Barry, the one with the suspiciously shiny shoes and the aura of cheap cologne. You call him, your voice tight with a mixture of anger and desperation. Barry, you say, you didn't happen to mention anything about the Holloway place being, active, did you? You can almost hear him shuffling papers on the other end, a nervous cough. He'll likely feign ignorance or offer some bland reassurance. Active. Oh, it's an old house, full of character. All old houses have their quirks. Disclosure laws regarding stigmatized properties, houses where murders, suicides, or alleged hauntings have occurred, vary wildly by location. Some places require realtors to disclose such information if asked directly, while others have no such requirements. Historians still argue whether the value of a property should be affected by such intangible and proven claims, but the debate highlights the very real economic and psychological impact these beliefs can have. Barry, it seems, is firmly in the "what they don't know won't hurt my commission" camp. The skepticism you encounter is disheartening. It makes you doubt yourself, even when confronted with your own chilling experiences and the tangible evidence of the EVP recordings or the locket. This feeling of being disbelieved, of having your reality questioned, is a common thread in many accounts of paranormal experiences. It's a lonely road. You retreat further into yourself, into the confines of the house that is the source of your terror, feeling like you're the only one who truly understands what's happening. Your home, which should be a refuge from the outside world, has become your private prison, and the outside world offers no key. There's a quirky, fringe tidbit from parapsychology suggesting that strong skepticism can sometimes inhibit paranormal phenomena, as if the entities themselves are shy or unwilling to perform for non-believers. Or perhaps, more pragmatically, skeptics are simply less likely to interpret ambiguous events as paranormal. Either way, the wall of disbelief you encounter from friends and rational authorities only serves to amplify your sense of isolation and the dawning, terrifying realization that if you're going to deal with what's in your house, you might have to do it alone, or at least find help from less conventional sources. The mainstream avenues have proven to be dead ends, paved with polite smiles and gentle suggestions that you might just be a little bit tired, feeling thoroughly dismissed by friends, family, and any conventional authority you dared to approach. Even Barry the realtor, who probably sold you the house knowing full well it had more character than a Dickens novel marathon, you start to consider less conventional avenues of help. If the mundane world won't acknowledge your problem, maybe the world that deals with the unexplainable will. Your late-night internet searches shift from how to fix a leaky faucet to paranormal investigators near me. You feel a strange mixture of desperation and sheepishness as you type those words. It's a step into a realm you've only ever seen on sensationalized TV shows, full of night vision cameras and people whispering dramatically in dark rooms. You find a few local groups. Some look a bit amateurish, with websites that seem to have been designed in 1998 and never updated. Others appear more professional, with testimonials and lists of equipment that sound impressively technical, even if you don't know what half of it means. After some hesitation, you reach out to one of the more credible-looking teams. You draft an email, carefully wording your experiences, trying to sound rational and not like you've completely lost your marbles, even though, frankly, you're starting to wonder. You describe the history you've uncovered about the Holloway children, Emily and Thomas, the EVPs you've captured, the moving objects, the oppressive atmosphere, and the terrifying impact it's having on your family, especially your children. To your surprise, you receive a prompt and empathetic reply. They don't dismiss you. They don't suggest you're stressed or imaginative. They ask follow-up questions. They listen. For the first time in weeks, you feel a flicker of hope. Maybe these people, these expert eyes, will be able to see what others can't or won't. They agree to conduct an investigation. A team of 3 or 4 individuals arrives one evening, laden with Pelican cases full of equipment. There's usually a lead investigator, often someone with years of experience and a calm, reassuring demeanor. There might be a tech specialist, responsible for setting up cameras, audio recorders, and various environmental sensors. And perhaps a sensitive or a medium, someone who claims to be able to perceive or communicate with spirits directly, This is often a point where more scientifically minded investigators and those who incorporate psychic methods sometimes diverge. The use of psychics in paranormal investigations is a contentious topic. Historians still argue whether individuals claiming psychic abilities throughout history genuinely possessed unique sensitivities or were simply adept at cold reading and interpreting subtle cues, often within the framework of prevailing spiritualist beliefs. The team is respectful of your home. They explain their methodology. They'll conduct interviews with you and your family members, gathering detailed accounts of your experiences. They'll take baseline readings of electromagnetic fields, EMF, temperature, and ambient sound throughout the house. The theory, popular in paranormal circles, is that spirits can manipulate these environmental factors, causing spikes in EMF or sudden temperature drops. Mainstream science, of course, points out that faulty wiring, unshielded appliances, and natural drafts can easily explain such fluctuations. But in the context of your increasingly inexplicable experiences, you're willing to keep an open mind. As night falls, the investigation proper begins. They set up infrared cameras in the hotspot areas, Lily's room, the dining room corner, the upstairs landing. Sensitive audio recorders are placed strategically. The tech specialist might use a spirit box or ghost box, a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies, supposedly allowing spirits to manipulate the white noise and fragments of broadcast to form words. This is another piece of equipment that draws considerable skepticism, as it's very prone to auditory pareidolia, but you watch, fascinated and apprehensive, as they begin a session. The lead investigator might conduct an EVP session much like you did, but with more sophisticated equipment and a more practiced approach, asking questions into the darkness. Emily? Thomas? Are you here with us? Can you tell us why you're still in this house? The silence in between questions is thick with anticipation. You huddle in a corner, or perhaps you've been asked to wait in another room to avoid contaminating any potential evidence, feeling like a spectator at a very strange, very personal sporting event. Throughout the night, they meticulously document everything. Any unusual sounds, any fluctuations on their meters, any personal experiences team members might have a sudden feeling of cold, a touch, a sense of being watched. They might capture things you've experienced yourself. A door creaking open on its own, a cold spot forming suddenly in the middle of a room, an anomalous light flitting across a darkened hallway on camera. They might even capture new EVPs, perhaps clearer than the ones you recorded, or a strange shadow figure darting past a doorway on an infrared camera. There's a quirky fringe tidbit about some investigators using trigger objects, items that might have personal significance to the presumed spirits, like antique toys or period-appropriate clothing, hoping to elicit a response. They might place a doll in what they believe was a nursery, or a set of old marbles on the floor with a camera trained on them to see if they move. After several hours, as dawn approaches, the team packs up their equipment. They don't give you immediate answers. They explain that they need to review all the audio and video footage, analyze the data from their sensors, a process that can take days or even weeks. But as they leave, the lead investigator might offer some preliminary thoughts. Perhaps they'll confirm that they, too, felt the oppressive atmosphere, or that they experienced unexplained phenomena. There's definitely something going on here. They might say a statement that is both terrifying and immensely validating. You're not crazy. It's not just in your head. These expert eyes have seen, or at least recorded, something too. The wait for their findings is agonizing. But for the first time since this ordeal began, you don't feel completely alone. You have allies, people who take your experiences seriously, who are applying a systematic, albeit unconventional, approach to understanding what's happening in your home. The ghostly evidence they may or may not have captured represents a potential turning point. It might not solve the problem, but it could provide the confirmation you need to decide on your next and perhaps more drastic course of action. The house, meanwhile, seems to wait, its secrets perhaps momentarily stirred but far from revealed, its spectral residents perhaps observed, but not yet understood or appeased. The paranormal investigation team finally gets back to you. They present their findings, perhaps in a formal-looking report or during a sit-down meeting. They lay out the evidence, the EVPs, clearer now, perhaps even containing more distinct words or phrases. Maybe a chilling piece of video footage showing a shadow moving across a wall when no one was there, or a door handle visibly turning on its own. They might show you graphs of EMF spikes that coincided with reported experiences or sudden, localized temperature drops recorded by their sensors. While none of it might be smoking gun proof that would convince a hardened skeptic, for you, it's confirmation. It's validation. It's terrifying. The investigators might offer their interpretation. They might conclude that your home is indeed experiencing paranormal activity, likely connected to the tragic history of Emily and Thomas Holloway. They might suggest that these are intelligent haunts, meaning the spirits are aware and capable of interacting, rather than just a residual haunting, which is more like an energetic recording replaying past events. They might even suggest that the children aren't alone, that perhaps other, less benign entities are also present, or that the trauma of the fire created a particularly strong psychic imprint on the property. Now comes the crucial question: what do you do about it? The investigators might offer a range of suggestions. Some teams focus purely on investigation and documentation, leaving the treatment to others. Some might recommend trying to communicate directly with the spirits to understand what they want, or to help them cross over, a concept popularized by spiritualism and modern paranormal belief, though its historical roots are complex, with various cultures having different ideas about the afterlife and the fate of troubled souls. This idea of helping spirits move on became particularly prominent in Western spiritualist movements from the 19th century onwards, a departure from earlier beliefs that often saw ghosts as more malevolent or permanently earthbound. Let's say you, or the investigators, decide that attempting some form of communication or spiritual cleansing is the next logical step. This is where things can get significantly more intense. The investigators might know a reputable medium or a spiritual practitioner they work with, someone experienced in such matters. Or perhaps they themselves are equipped to lead such a ritual. You agree, feeling a potent cocktail of hope and trepidation. Anything is better than continuing to live in this state of constant fear and unease. The ritual itself can take many forms, depending on the beliefs and practices of the person conducting it. It might involve a seance, an attempt to directly communicate with Emily and Thomas. You might all sit around a table, perhaps in the room where their presence feels strongest. The medium might enter a trance-like state or use tools like a Ouija board, a device with its own controversial history, patented in 1890 and often associated with summoning unwanted entities as much as with peaceful communication. They might speak aloud, addressing the spirits, asking them why they remain, if they are lost, if they need help. During this ritual, the atmosphere in the house can become electric. You might experience a dramatic increase in the phenomena you've grown accustomed to, as if the spirits are reacting to the attempt to contact them. The temperature might plummet. Objects might rattle or even fall. You might hear distinct knocks or rapping sounds in response to questions, a classic seance phenomenon. Remember the Fox sisters in 19th century America, whose claims of communicating with a spirit through rapping sounds helped launch the spiritualist movement. Their story is a historical cornerstone of this kind of spirit communication, though it ended with confessions of fraud, adding another layer to the already complex debate around such practices. The medium might relay messages, supposedly from Emily or Thomas. They might speak of fear, confusion, of being unable to find her parents, or of being tethered to the house by their traumatic deaths. They might express a longing for peace. Hearing these messages, even if you're skeptical about the medium's abilities, can be incredibly emotional especially given what you know about the children's tragic fate. Lily, your daughter, might even react during this time, perhaps saying things that eerily echo what the medium is describing, as if she too is party to this otherworldly conversation. However, not all such attempts at communication are benign or lead to peaceful resolutions. Sometimes stirring up the spiritual energy in a house can have unintended consequences. If there are other, less pleasant entities present, or if the spirits are particularly agitated or malevolent, a ritual can make things worse. The veil, as they say, thins, and not always for the better. Instead of quiet whispers, you might hear angry shouts. Instead of cold spots, you might feel an aggressive, pushing energy. The activity, once somewhat predictable in its patterns, might become erratic and openly hostile. There's a quirky, fringe belief among some paranormal circles that certain rituals or attempts to open portals can inadvertently attract other opportunistic entities, like uninvited guests crashing a spiritual party. Historians still argue whether the perceived increase in activity after such rituals is a genuine supernatural response or a result of heightened suggestion and psychological priming in the participants, who are now expecting more intense phenomena. In your case, let's say the ritual has mixed results. Perhaps there's a sense of sadness, a fleeting feeling of connection with the lost children. But afterwards, the house feels different, angrier. The playful, if unsettling, movement of keys is replaced by something more forceful. Doors don't just creak open, they slam shut with violence. The feeling of being watched intensifies into a palpable sense of menace. It's as if, by trying to reach out, by acknowledging the presence of the spirits, you've somehow given them more power, or provoked something that was lying dormant. The attempt to thin the veil and allow the spirits to speak has perhaps thinned it too much, and what's stepping through is no longer just the sad echoes of lost children, but something darker, something more threatening. The hope for a peaceful resolution begins to curdle into a new, more urgent fear. The aftermath of the attempted communication, the ritual meant to bring understanding or peace, has unfortunately tipped the scales in the wrong direction. The house is no longer just sad or mischievous. It feels actively malevolent. The subtle hints and creeping dread have escalated into overt, physical manifestations of whatever unseen forces share your home. The veil thins, spirits speak phase is given way to the spirits are yelling, and they're not happy. It often starts with an intensification of things you've already experienced. The cold spots become bone-chillingly frigid, capable of making your teeth chatter even in a well-heated room. The feeling of being watched is now accompanied by the distinct sensation of being touched. You'll be standing at the kitchen sink and feel a cold, wispy pressure on your arm, as if invisible fingers have brushed against your skin. You'll be walking down the hallway and feel a sudden push from behind, strong enough to make you stumble, but when you whirl around, there's no one there. These phantom touches are unnerving, a violation of your personal space by an unseen aggressor. The children, if you have them, bear the brunt of this new wave of activity, and it's no longer about invisible friends. Lily might wake up with small, unexplained scratches on her arms or back, 3 parallel marks that look disturbingly like claw marks. You try to rationalize them. She was scratching in her sleep. It was the cat, even if you don't own a cat, or the cat was locked out of her room. But the regularity and the distinct pattern of the marks are hard to ignore. Tom might complain of being pushed or tripped by something he can't see, especially on the stairs, that same staircase that has always been a focal point of unsettling creaks and groans. You too might start to find unexplained marks on your body, bruises that appear overnight in odd places, with no memory of bumping into anything. Perhaps a more distinct handprint-shaped bruise on your arm after feeling that spectral grip. These physical manifestations are terrifying because they cross a significant boundary. It's one thing to hear a whisper or see a shadow. It's another entirely to be physically assaulted, however minorly, by an invisible force. It makes the threat feel immediate and undeniably real. The idea of spirits being able to physically interact with the living is a cornerstone of many poltergeist accounts throughout history. From the famous Bell Witch case in 19th century Tennessee, where family members reported being slapped, pinched, and having their hair pulled by an unseen entity, to more modern claims, the physical assault aspect is often what elevates a haunting to a poltergeist infestation. Objects don't just move subtly anymore, they fly. You'll be arguing with your partner about whose turn it is to take out the rubbish, the tension in the house already palpable, when a glass suddenly slides off the kitchen counter and shatters on the floor. Or a picture will fly off the wall, not just fall, but launch itself across the room as if thrown by an invisible tantrum. Books might tumble from shelves with force. These aren't the gentle nudges of before. These are displays of power, of anger. It's as if the house itself, or the entities within it, are lashing out. One evening, you're all in the living room trying to maintain a fragile semblance of normalcy, perhaps watching a determinately cheerful cartoon with the children. Suddenly, all the lights in the house flicker violently and then go out, plunging you into darkness. This is followed by a deafening bang from upstairs, like something heavy has been thrown against a wall. The children scream. You fumble for your phone, your flashlight app, your hands shaking so badly you can barely operate it. When you finally get some light, you creep upstairs, hard hammering, to find a heavy antique dresser in the hallway. One that normally takes 2 people to even budge has been dragged several feet across the floor and slammed against the opposite wall. This is no longer deniable. This isn't faulty wiring or old house settling. This is a direct, physical threat. The sense of safety in your own home is completely gone. You feel besieged, constantly on edge, waiting for the next aggressive act. Sleep is almost impossible, punctuated by bangs, crashes, and the terrified cries of your children. You start to feel physically ill from the constant stress and fear. Your home has become a war zone, and you are losing. Historians still argue whether poltergeist phenomena, particularly those involving moving objects and physical assaults, are genuinely caused by external spiritual entities, or if they are a rare form of psychokinesis, perhaps unconsciously generated by a living person in a household who is under extreme emotional or psychological stress, often, historically, an adolescent, leading to the troubled teen. Theory of poltergeist activity. Regardless of the ultimate cause, the effect on those experiencing it is one of sheer terror and helplessness. You might even experience a direct, more personal attack. Perhaps you're lying in bed, sleep paralysis taking hold, and the shadowy figure you've sensed before now feels like it's physically pressing down on you, suffocating you, its icy grip on your arms leaving those telltale bruises. Or you might be forcefully shoved against a wall while walking through a seemingly empty room. The intent feels undeniably hostile. There's a quirky, fringe belief in demonology, a theological study you probably never thought you'd be remotely interested in, that entities can go through stages of manifestation, starting with subtle signs, then moving to oppression, the psychological torment, and finally to infestation or even possession, involving direct physical interaction and attempts to control. Your experiences seem to be following a terrifyingly similar playbook. The marks, the shoves, the thrown objects. It's a clear escalation, a statement that whatever resides in your house is capable of harm and is no longer content to simply make its presence known. The playful, if creepy, Emily, who left the locket now seems like a distant, almost benign memory compared to the aggressive force that has been unleashed. The physical manifestations, the flying objects, the unexplained marks, the terrifying feeling of being physically pushed or held down, it's all become too much. Your dream house is now an undeniable house of horrors, and the safety of your family is paramount. You've likely considered leaving many times by now, packing a bag in the middle of the night and just running. But perhaps there's a stubborn part of you that doesn't want to be driven out of your own home by whatever this is. Or maybe practicalities tie you down, the mortgage, the upheaval of moving again, The fear of not being able to sell a house with such a profoundly disturbed reputation, especially if word has gotten out. Remember Barry the realtor? You're pretty sure he wouldn't be keen on taking this listing back. So you decide to fight back, or at least to try and reclaim your space. The paranormal investigators might have offered some suggestions for cleansing the house, or you might do your own research into spiritual protection and banishment rituals. This is where you enter the territory of ancient traditions and deeply held beliefs about how to deal with unwanted spiritual presences. You might try smudging with sage, a practice common in some Native American traditions for purifying a space and driving away negative energy. You walk through each room, waving the smoking sage bundle, the acrid scent filling the air, reciting prayers or affirmations of protection, feeling a bit like you're performing in a very niche, very serious play. Or perhaps you turn to religious rituals. Depending on your own faith or lack thereof, you might invite a priest, a minister, a rabbi, or another religious leader to bless the house. These blessings often involve prayers, holy water, and invocations for divine protection. The idea of blessing a home to protect it from evil or misfortune is an ancient one, found in countless cultures and religions. Think of the mezuzah affixed to the doorposts of Jewish homes, containing scriptures, or the practice in some Christian denominations of having a new home blessed by a priest. These rituals are meant to consecrate the space, to make it holy and inhospitable to malevolent forces. You might try creating barriers of salt across doorways and windowsills, another folk practice found worldwide, based on a belief that salt is a purifying substance that spirits cannot cross. You're basically seasoning your house like a giant, inedible pretzel, hoping it'll keep the bad vibes out. You might hang religious symbols, crucifixes, or other protective amulets. You're throwing everything you can think of the problem, a desperate, multi-pronged assault of good intentions and ancient traditions. But the house seems to resist. It's as if the very walls, the foundation, the land itself is imbued with the negativity, with the presence of Emily and Thomas, and perhaps whatever darker energy has been stirred up. During your attempts at cleansing, the activity might flare up dramatically. As you smudge with sage, doors might slam shut in the room you just purified. As a religious figure recites prayers, objects might fly off shelves with even greater force, as if in defiance. Cold spots might intensify, where you might hear angry, guttural growls that seem to emanate from the walls themselves. It's like poking a hornet's nest with a very small, very ineffective stick. The house feels actively defiant, as if it's a conscious entity fighting to maintain its hold on the spirits within, or perhaps it is the entity, and the spirits are just part of its tormented consciousness. This idea of a house itself being sick or inherently malevolent is a trope in horror, but when you're living it, it feels terrifyingly plausible. Historians still argue whether the concept of genius loci, or the protective spirit of a place, found in Roman religion, could have a darker counterpart, a malevolent spirit intrinsically tied to a location, making the land itself cursed or haunted. You might find that any peace gained by these rituals is fleeting. The house might quiet down for a day or two, lulling you into a false sense of security, making you think it worked. We're finally free. And then the activity will return, sometimes with a vengeance, as if to mock your efforts. The scratches on Lily might reappear. The oppressive atmosphere will descend again, heavier than before. It's a demoralizing cycle of hope and despair. There's a quirky fringe theory in some paranormal circles about place memory being so deeply embedded in certain locations, especially those with a history of intense trauma like your house, that it's almost impossible to eradicate. It suggests the energy is soaked into the very stones, the wood, the soil, and that any cleansing is like trying to wipe a permanent stain off an old photograph. You might lighten it for a moment, but the image remains. You might even find that the house seems to target the very symbols of your attempted cleansing. A crucifix hung on a wall might be found snapped in two on the floor. A bowl of holy water left out might be overturned, or the water might inexplicably evaporate or turn cloudy and foul. It feels like a direct, contemptuous response to your efforts to impose order and light onto its darkness. The feeling of being trapped intensifies. You're not just trapped by a mortgage or the inconvenience of moving. You're trapped by an entity, a force, that refuses to yield, that seems to feed on your fear and desperation. The walls of your home, which should represent security and comfort, now feel like the unyielding bars of a prison cell, and the warden is an unseen hostile force that actively thwarts your every attempt at escape or reclamation. The defiant walls seem to echo with the trapped souls of Emily and Thomas, and perhaps something more, all caught in a cycle of sorrow and anger that you've unwittingly become a part of. The battle for your home is one you are clearly not winning. The defiance of the house, its aggressive resistance to every attempt at cleansing or blessing, leaves you feeling utterly depleted and cornered. The paranormal investigators might offer one last, more intensive option, or perhaps in your desperate research, you stumble upon a ritual that promises a more definitive outcome, a final stand. This isn't just about waving some sage or sprinkling some salt anymore. This is a more complex, perhaps more dangerous undertaking, one aimed at either forcibly expelling the entities or finally bringing peace to the troubled spirits of Emily and Thomas, and in doing so, cleansing the house itself. You are at the end of your rope, willing to try almost anything to reclaim your home and your sanity, even if it carries a significant risk. This final stand ritual might be a more formal exorcism, if the activity is deemed demonic or severely malevolent by those you're consulting. Or it could be a specific type of spiritual intervention designed to help earthbound spirits, like the Holloway children, to move on or cross over into the light, a concept that, while popular, varies greatly in its specifics depending on the belief system. The idea of a formal rite of exorcism, of course, has a long and often dramatic history, most famously within the Catholic Church, but with parallels in many other faiths. The Roman ritual, for instance, contains specific prayers and rites for expelling malevolent entities, a practice reserved for trained clergy and undertaken only after careful investigation. Let's say you opt for a ritual focused on helping Emily and Thomas, believing their unresolved trauma and sorrow are the primary source of the haunting, perhaps amplified or manipulated by other, less sympathetic forces. The ritual might be conducted by the medium you previously worked with, or by another spiritual practitioner who specializes in this kind of work. It could involve creating a focal point, perhaps using the locket you found and the old photograph of the children, trying to connect with them on a deeper level. The practitioner might guide you and your family, if deemed appropriate and safe for them to be present, which is a big if, in prayers, visualizations, or affirmations, sending love and reassurance to the lost children, telling them they are not forgotten, that it's okay to leave, that their parents are waiting for them. The atmosphere during this final ritual is likely to be incredibly charged. The house, which has already shown its displeasure with your previous and milder attempts, might react with unprecedented fury. You could experience the most intense phenomena yet, deafening bangs, objects not just flying but smashing violently, temperatures plummeting to Arctic levels, disembodied voices screaming in rage or terror. The practitioner might seem to be in a direct spiritual battle, chanting, praying, or issuing commands, their voice strained, their face beaded with sweat. You and your family, if present, will be huddled together, terrified, praying for it to work, for an end to this nightmare. There's a critical moment in many such rituals, a tipping point. The practitioner might announce that they have made contact, that Emily and Thomas are present, confused and scared, but also aware of your efforts. They might describe seeing the children, or relaying messages of forgiveness or farewell. There might be a profound sense of sadness in the room, a collective outpouring of grief for these young lives lost. Or if a more malevolent force is involved, there might be a terrifying confrontation, a practitioner wrestling spiritually with an unseen entity, the room filled with an almost palpable sense of evil. Historians still argue whether the dramatic effects witnessed during such intense rituals are objective supernatural events or powerful psychological dramas fueled by extreme stress, fervent belief, and the intense theatrics of the rite itself. The power of suggestion, group hysteria, and sensory overload in a highly charged emotional environment can be immense. What is the outcome of this final, desperate stand? It's a gamble. Sometimes, in stories and anecdotal accounts, such rituals are depicted as successful. The house grows quiet, the oppressive atmosphere lifts, the temperature returns to normal. There's a feeling of peace, of release. The spirits of Emily and Thomas have supposedly found their way, and any other malevolent influences have been banished. You might feel an overwhelming sense of relief, of exhaustion, but also of triumph. The nightmare is over. Your home is finally yours. This is the blessing you prayed for. But sometimes the ritual doesn't bring the hope for peace. It might fail entirely. The entity's too strong, too entrenched, or even more chillingly, it might seem to work only for the quiet to be a temporary reprieve, a deceptive calm before an even more insidious storm. The entities might simply be lying low, gathering strength, or replaced by something else. There's a quirky old superstition, almost a reverse psychology kind of belief, that sometimes a house becomes so accustomed to its haunting, so defined by it, that it will actively draw in new spirits if the old ones are removed, abhorring a spiritual vacuum. Or perhaps the ritual has a profoundly ambiguous result. The activity lessens, becomes less overtly hostile, but the sadness remains, a faint, lingering echo. Emily and Thomas might be quieter, but not entirely gone. The house is no longer a place of active terror, but it's also not a place of true comfort or joy. It's forever marked, and so are you. Is this a blessing or a curse? You've won a partial victory, perhaps, but at what cost? The final stand has been made, and you are left to survey the aftermath, wondering if the fragile peace you've achieved will hold, or if the shadows are just waiting for you to lower your guard. The silence that follows is heavy with uncertainty, and the question of whether the house is truly cleansed or merely pacified hangs in the air. Let's imagine the final ritual, your desperate last stand, didn't bring the lasting peace you craved. Perhaps there was a brief lull, a deceptive quiet that allowed a sliver of hope to wedge its way into your exhausted mind. You dared to breathe a little easier, to imagine a future in this house that wasn't punctuated by slamming doors and icy dread. You even managed a full night's sleep, or something close to it, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. But the house, it seemed, had other plans. It was merely biding its time, gathering its strength, or perhaps enjoying the cruel irony of your fleeting optimism. The return of the activity is subtle at first, a creeping familiarity. A misplaced object here, a faint, almost forgotten creak there. You try to dismiss it. It's just the house settling again. You tell yourself, the words tasting like ash in your mouth, we're just being paranoid after everything that's happened. But deep down, the fragile peace is fracturing. Then comes the one last scare. The event that shatters any lingering hope, any stubborn refusal to admit defeat. It's often something intensely personal, something that feels targeted, designed to break your will completely. It's the spectral equivalent of a final knockout punch. Perhaps it involves your children. You go to check on Lily late one night. You open her bedroom door quietly, expecting to see her sleeping soundly, a picture of innocence. Instead, you find her standing in the middle of the room, her back to you, perfectly still. Lily? You whisper, a knot of ice forming in your stomach. She doesn't respond. You step closer, reaching out to touch her shoulder. As she slowly turns, her eyes are wide, vacant, and not her own. And then, in a voice that is chillingly adult, gravelly, and utterly alien coming from your 6-year-old daughter, she says something. Something terrifying. Perhaps a direct threat. You will all leave. This house is ours. Or maybe a piece of knowledge she couldn't possibly possess, a secret detail about the Holloway family's tragedy, delivered with malevolent glee. Then, just as suddenly, she blinks, her eyes clear, and she looks up at you, confused. Mommy, what's wrong? She has no memory of it. But you do. The image, the voice are burned into your soul. Or maybe the final scare is a direct, undeniable assault on you. You're home alone, perhaps in the basement, finally summoning the courage to retrieve those long-forgotten Christmas decorations, a pathetic attempt at normalcy. The oppressive atmosphere is overwhelming, the feeling of being watched more intense than ever. Suddenly, you are violently shoved from behind, sprawling onto the cold, damp concrete. Before you can even cry out, tools fly off a nearby workbench, clattering around you, one narrowly missing your head. You scramble backwards, crab-walking towards the stairs, as a furious, guttural roar seems to erupt from the very walls, the sound of pure, undiluted rage that vibrates through your bones. You don't wait to see what happens next. You flee, scrambling up the stairs, bursting out of the basement door, and don't stop running until you're outside, gasping for air on the lawn, your heart feeling like it's trying to beat its way out of your chest. This final event is characterized by its clarity and its undeniable intent. There's no ambiguity, no room for rationalization. It's not a creak, not a cold spot, not a misinterpreted shadow. It's a direct, terrifying confrontation that screams, in no uncertain terms, get out. It's the house playing its trump card. The decision, when it comes, is swift and absolute. There's no more debate, no more weighing of options. The stubborn refusal to leave, the desire to fight for your home, it all evaporates in the face of this ultimate terror. Your only thought is to protect yourself and your family. You realize, with a chilling certainty, that some battles cannot be won. Some places are simply not meant to be inhabited by the living, at least not by your living. The house has made its position unequivocally clear. It doesn't want you. And now you finally truly believe it. You start packing, a frantic, desperate energy fueling your movements. You throw clothes into suitcases, essentials into boxes. There's no care for order, no sentimentality about leaving things behind. Material possessions suddenly seem utterly insignificant compared to the urgent need for safety and peace. You don't even care where you go, as long as it's away from here. A motel, a friend's sofa, your parents' spare room, anywhere but this house. The act of leaving might even be fraught with one last parting shot from the house. As you carry the last box out to the car, a window on the second floor might slam shut with such force that the glass shatters, raining shards down onto the porch. Or as you pull away from the curb, you might glance in the rearview mirror and see a shadowy figure standing in an upstairs window, watching you go, a final, silent, victorious stare. Historically, accounts of families fleeing haunted houses often describe such a last straw event, a point where the phenomena becomes so unbearable or threatening that flight is the only viable option. The famous Amityville horror case, for example, whatever its ultimate veracity, and historians still argue vehemently about that, with many labeling it a hoax, hinges on the Lutz family fleeing their home after only 28 days, citing escalating, terrifying events. There's a quirky, fringe belief that sometimes a haunting will deliberately escalate to drive occupants away, as if the entities need the house to themselves, or are trying to protect something within it. As you drive away, the overwhelming emotion is not sadness for the loss of your dream home, but profound, gut-wrenching relief, so potent it's almost nauseating. The further you get from the house, the lighter the atmosphere in the car seems to become, as if you're physically outrunning a storm cloud of oppressive energy. You don't look back. You can't. The escape is underway, and every mile put between you and that cursed place feels like a victory, however hard one, However terrifying the cost, the car speeds away, each rotation of the tires a small act of severing, putting distance between you and the place that was supposed to be your sanctuary. The further you drive, the more the suffocating weight that has been pressing down on you for months seems to lift, replaced by a shaky, raw-edged relief. You might find yourself glancing compulsively in a rearview mirror, half expecting to see the house receding into the distance, its windows like dark, accusing eyes. Or perhaps you can't bring yourself to look back at all, choosing instead to focus on the road ahead, on the simple, tangible reality of the asphalt unreeling beneath you. The immediate aftermath of your escape is a blur of practicalities and emotional exhaustion. Finding a temporary place to stay, a sterile motel room, a relative's spare bedroom cluttered with forgotten hobbies, a friend's slightly too small sofa. The conversations are strained, your explanations for this sudden flight, perhaps vague or met with concern, disbelieving silence if you haven't fully confided in them before. How do you even begin to articulate the reality of what you've endured? How do you explain that you were driven from your home not by a flood or a fire, but by unseen forces, by the sorrowful echoes of children who died a century ago, and by something that felt far older and more malevolent? The empty rooms of that house, the ones you so carefully painted, the spaces where you'd envisioned years of happy memories, now exist only in your mind, but they are vivid, sharp, and tainted. You can picture every detail. The way the light fell in the morning through the bay window in the living room, now forever associated with the icy chill that would inexplicably gather there. The creak of that specific stair, once a quirky annoyance, now a sound that can make your heart leap with remembered fear even when you're miles away. Lily's closet, where Emily left the locket, is no longer a child's storage space, but a miniature portal to the unsettling. The upstairs landing, the dining room corner, the basement, each location is imprinted with its own specific brand of terror. Even in the safety of your new, temporary surroundings, the fear lingers. It's a residue that clings to you, like the faint, persistent smell of smoke after a fire. Every unexplained noise in your new, blessedly mundane environment, the hum of an unfamiliar refrigerator, the creak of a floorboard in a different building, can send a jolt of adrenaline through you, a conditioned reflex of terror. You might find yourself waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, disoriented, momentarily thinking you're still back in that bedroom, expecting to feel the icy grip of sleep paralysis or hear the faint, sobbing EVP. The children, too, carry the scars. They might be clingier, more anxious, prone to nightmares for a long time to come. They might be reluctant to talk about what happened, or they might talk about it incessantly, trying to process the fear and confusion. Lily might ask about Emily, a sad bewilderment in her voice, wondering where her friend went. How do you explain to a child that her imaginary friend was likely the ghost of a girl who died tragically, a ghost you had to flee from? There are no parenting manuals for this particular situation. Dealing with the practicalities of the abandoned house is another nightmare. The mortgage still needs to be paid. What do you do with a house you can't live in and are terrified to even enter again? Selling it seems like an ethical minefield. Do you disclose the active spiritual presence to potential buyers? Barry the realtor would probably have a conniption. Yet, how could you, in good conscience, let another unsuspecting family walk into that same nightmare? The financial and logistical burdens add another layer of stress to the already overwhelming emotional trauma. Historically, properties with reputations for being haunted often suffer from significantly decreased value and can be incredibly difficult to sell, sometimes remaining vacant for decades, becoming local legends and targets for dares. The famous Winchester Mystery House in California, with its bizarre architecture allegedly designed to confuse ghosts, is an extreme example of how such a reputation can define a property. You might find yourself obsessively researching, even now that you're out, trying to find other accounts similar to yours, seeking validation, understanding. Perhaps you delve into the history of the land itself, before the Holloway house was even built. Was there something there before? Some older tragedy, some sacred or desecrated ground? There's a quirky fringe belief that certain locations are geopathically stressed or sit on negative energy lines, making them prone to paranormal activity. It's another attempt to find a reason, any reason, for what you endured. The memories of the house will likely stay with you, becoming a dark undercurrent to your life. A dinner party anecdote you'll never tell. The shiver down your spine when you drive past an old Victorian that looks a little too familiar. The lingering fear might fade over time, the sharp edges softening, but the knowledge of what you experienced, the certainty that there are things beyond our everyday understanding, things that can reach out and touch us, will remain. Historians still argue whether the enduring power of ghost stories and haunted house narratives in human culture stems from a genuine, albeit rare, interaction with the supernatural, or if it's a reflection of our deepest psychological anxieties about death, the unknown, and the spaces we inhabit. For you, it's no longer an academic debate. You lived it. You survived it. But you will never be quite the same. The empty rooms of that house are far away now, but a small shadowed part of them will always reside within you. And so, as our journey through these shadowed halls comes to a close for tonight, allow the unsettling echoes to slowly fade. The house on Elm Street, or whichever quiet tree-lined road it occupied in your mind, now stands silent once more, perhaps waiting, perhaps merely existing, its secrets held tight within its defiant walls. The fear that prickled your skin, the icy touch in the darkness, the whispers that seemed to emanate from the very air, let them recede like the tide going out, leaving behind only the smooth, undisturbed sand of the present moment. The human mind is a remarkable thing, capable of immense imagination and deep feeling, and the places we call home become intertwined with our lives, our histories, our emotions. Sometimes, the weight of past events, the sorrow of lives long gone, can feel almost tangible, especially in houses that have stood for generations, silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of human experience. Whether those feelings manifest as a true spectral presence or as a profound psychological resonance, the impact on those who dwell within can be equally powerful, equally real in its effect. But now, you are safe far from those creaking stairs and watchful shadows. The journey was through a landscape of fear, but it was a journey of the mind, and you have returned. Allow your own breath to deepen, to soften. Feel the comfort of your own bed, the quiet of your own space, a space filled not with unseen watchers, but with your own peaceful presence. Let the gentle hum of the fan, or the quiet stillness of your room, be a lullaby. The stories are told, the house is left behind, and only the quiet of the night remains. Rest now. The shadows will keep until morning.